Good morning. Welcome back to another Teaching Sound Doctrine Bible class. And today we're going to look at the lesson here of clearing the confusion on elders. Now, a lot of folks have a misconception of what elders are, how they rule, what they need to be, what they need to do in order to be an elder. A lot of folks don't even want elders anymore, which is highly unscriptural, but it's not that unusual. So before we jump right in on this topic of elders, let's set some groundwork for today's study. You know, sometimes the church is referred to as in the universal sense, the general assembly. If we look at Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 23, it says, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, who to the spirit of just men made perfect. You see, the word church here denotes a called out assembly. The church, in this sense, is composed of all the saved, all the redeemed individuals throughout the world. They sustain this spiritual relationship because they have obeyed the gospel of the Son of God. Now, if you look at Romans chapter 6 and verse 17, that states, but God be thanked that ye were servants of sin, but ye have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered to you. They have by one process been baptized into Christ, according to Galatians 3:27 says, for as many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ in and into the church. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 13 says, for by one Spirit are we all baptized into one body, whether we be Jews or Gentiles, whether we be bond or free, and have been all made to drink of one Spirit, which is the body of Christ. You can also look up Ephesians chapter 4, verse 4, and Colossians 1:18. But it is one body, and it's the institution that Jesus promised to build in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 18. It says, and I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. You see, it came into existence on the day of Pentecost after Jesus arose from the dead in Acts chapter 2. The church in the universal concept has no organization except that Christ is the head of the body and each member is subject to him. The church is governed by the divine laws as set forth in the pages of the New Testament. Look at 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. You can also see Jude 3. It has no universal bishops or elders to direct its affairs. It has no earthly headquarters and has no synods or councils or conventions composed of delegates. It does not enact law and issue decrees. You see, in the New Testament, the church is sometimes referred to in a regional or territorial sense also, such as the churches of Galatia in Galatians 1:2, the churches of Judea in verse 22. You see, these were congregations, different assemblies of Christians in a specific or distinct area. There was no tie-up or federation or church of churches in these regions. An organization or tie-up of the Judean churches or the Galatian churches simply was unknown. Now, a third way in which the New Testament speaks of the church is in a local sense, a particular congregation of saints in a given place. So the church which was in Jerusalem in Acts chapter 8 and verse 1, the church of God which is at Corinth in 1 Corinthians 1:1, or say the church of the Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians 1:1. Each church was separated and independent from every other church. There was no federation of these churches. There was no form of a sponsoring church, which is one church directing any work of any other church or churches. In whatever sense the church may be referred to, each individual Christian and each local church must work under the direction of Christ and be guided by his teachings. And that's according to 2 John verse 9. Now, what does this have to do with elders? Well, you see, elders were appointed in every church according to Acts 14:23. There was always a plurality in each church. If you look at Acts chapter 11 and verse 29 and 30, look in Acts chapter 14 and verse 23, chapter 15 and verse 4, chapter 20 and verse 17, and the list goes on and on. I mean, I can continue the Philippians 1:1, 1 Timothy 4:14 and 5:17, Titus 1:5, James 5:14, or 1 Peter 5:1 and 2. You see, in the view of the fact that there were no universal elders and no Necessian elders, let's say, the question of how elders are ordained is confined to what? The local church only. Their oversight begins and ends in the local church where they have been ordained. They do not oversee other congregations, nor any of the work of any other congregation. Now, these are important things that we need to remember, and these are things that have been lost along the way. You see, the New Testament reveals to us that the church is a divine institution. It originated in the mind of God, according to Ephesians 3:10 and 11. It was built by the Son of God, Matthew 16 and verse 18. It was purchased by the blood of Christ in Acts 20:28. Christ is the head, Ephesians 5:23, and it exists in divine purpose according to 1 Timothy 3:15. And its members, the local church members, they labor in the hope of heaven. If you look at Titus 1 and verse 2 and 1 Peter 1:3 through 5. Now, this has set the background in place, and it's something that we need to continually keep in mind as we go through this study. So let's look at the elders and what their qualifications are. Now, an elder is a man who must meet the qualifications set forth in the scriptures. Today, due to a lack of teaching and a desire of many churches, simply do not have elders. They don't have qualified men, and they don't want qualified men. Those fortunate enough, though, to have them are often under the misconception that the elders are the bosses of the congregation, and therefore what they say is law. Yet there are still others who believe that elders are simply figureheads and have little or no duty at all in the workings of the church. You see, like the preacher, the elder in reality understands he's going to be held accountable, and more accountable than others. And he's willing to serve God to the best of his ability. Now, qualified elders are necessary for the well-being of the local church. There's no doubt about that. Titus was told to ordain elders in every city, Titus 1, verse 5. Paul, on a return trip of his missionary journey, appointed elders in every church, Acts chapter 14 and verse 23. So hence the churches are to have elders. Now, this is not to say that a church can't be a church because it doesn't have elders, but every church should strive to have its own individual elders, qualified men. You see, God has assigned the role of the elders in the church, and it is a grave and serious responsibility, as we're going to see in this lesson. Some take the office lightly, treating it as a glorified position to hold rather than to work to be done. The Bible says, if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work, 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1. The man who's motivated to become an elder simply to control the church and not do the work which the office entails has the wrong attitude, and he has absolutely no business being an elder. Paul says a man is to desire the function or work, not the power to rule over somebody. So the qualifications of the office of an elder are all prescribed by the Apostle Paul in the 3rd chapter of 1 Timothy and the 1st chapter of Titus. They are broken down into 6 basic divisions. And what we're going to do today is try to simplify our study by examining these divisions separately. They are distinguished as they are related respectively and to experience, reputation, domestic relations, character, habits, and the ability to teach and rule. And with that, let us start by looking at experience. You see, experience is in the life of a Christian. Paul says that an elder should not be a new convert, lest being lifted up with pride, he shall fall into condemnation of the devil. 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 6. The reason given shows that the office was and is one of high honor and responsibility. Not having the experience needed to be an elder would cause one to incur the danger of being lifted up with pride. Paul states a new convert would be more likely to fall into this sin than an experienced Christian. So what are we learning here? We're learning that these elders not only means age, but it means maturity. In assigning these qualifications, Paul shows how important it is that pride of office shall not characterize the eldership. It's the same important lesson that Jesus taught the disciples when he said that he that would be greatest among you, let him be the servant of all. So elders, although they do have authority, they are servants of God, and they have to do and act and be experienced enough to understand what their congregation is going through, making the decisions necessary to keep the church in a saved manner. Now, we also want to look at the reputation. This is the second part of our breakdown here. Reputation, how much good a church is capable of accomplishing in any community depends very much upon its reputation. The reputation of the church depends much upon that of its own representatives, of the representative men in that congregation. You see, it's required that an elder shall have a good report of them that are without, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Well, 1 Timothy 3:7 says that. If an elder falls into reproach, not only is the church reproached with him, but it is then necessary for that elder to lose his influence over the congregation. You know, Satan is overjoyed when he can snare his victim in such a manner. The elder himself, and possibly many members of his flock, may be exposed and ruined in such an event. You see, over the years, once good brethren who've been taught or caught in this snare of reproach, and now either stand in complete opposition to the truth, or they start a campaign of criticizing those who are doing the work that they failed to do. Now, we've seen this happen within churches, especially over the last 30 years. We've had all kinds of things come into the church, and more liberal men have been appointed elders than ever should have been. Also, when we're looking at elders, we have to look at the third of our topic here, their domestic relations. Paul, in his instruction to Timothy and to Titus, prescribed that the overseer shall be the husband of one wife. There's been a vast amount of dispute as to whether this requires him to be a married man, and that he should be the husband of one wife forbids having less than one, and as clearly it forbids having more than one. Now, I took the time to look up what J.W. McCarvey said on his treatise on the eldership, and I'm going to quote from his articles and that were originally published in the Apostolic Times in 1870. McGarvey says this: if it be said that a man owns but one farm, it is just as clearly implied that he owns one as to that he owns no more than one. Moreover, the context confirms the conclusion, for the apostle proceeds in both epistles to state how the overseer must govern his household and especially his children, which statements imply that he is to be a man of family. McGarvey goes on to state in his writing, a married man certainly possesses advantages over such works that are impossible for an unmarried man, and in the experience of the world must confirm the wisdom of the requirement that the overseer shall be the husband of one wife. It may be well to add that one living wife is clearly meant, and that there is no allusion to the number of deceased wives a man may have had. So we should also take note here that it is also required that the candidate for the eldership shall rule well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. Or, as it is expressed in Titus, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. The reason given for these requirements is this: for if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? If a man does not know how to rule his own house, he cannot take care of the church of God. That's very simple. He is incompetent to fill the office of the overseer if he cannot rule his own house well. Now let's take note here, and Michael and I discussed this earlier this morning. This is ruling his house. If he can't rule his house, then he cannot rule or take care of the affairs of the church. So again, if we, to quote McGarvey, he states when it is said that an overseer must be blameless, he must of necessity understand the term in a comparative, not in an absolute sense. This necessity arises from the fact acknowledged and insisted upon by the apostles that no man is entirely blameless when his character stands a fair comparison with the characters of other good men. The apostle seems to have his eye upon the counterpart of the good reputation, which we've already mentioned earlier in this lesson. If a man possessing a good repute among them who are without, those who are not Christians, is known to have a character corresponding to this, he is blameless in the only sense in which men in the flesh can be blameless. So if a man possessing a good repute among them who are without or outside of the church is known to have a character corresponding to this, he is blameless in the only sense in which men in the flesh can be blameless. Simply put, to be blameless is merely to be free from faults. Paul, in our text, proceeds to specify some faults which it is especially important for the overseer to avoid. He can't be covetous. He can't be greedy of filthy lucre. The elder must not be self-willed. No man is fit to hold office jointly with other men who is not content to often yield his own will to that of his peers. Neither is any man capable of exercising moral sway over a community who possesses an iron will and never bends to the wishes of others. An elder is not to be a striker nor a brawler, nor should he be easily angered. He's to be temperate and patient. Paul also names a number of positive elements of an elder's character. He must be just, for he is a judicial functionary of the church. He must be sober, that is sober-minded. He must be a lover of hospitality, for otherwise he's devoid of that sympathy which is necessary in order to secure the affection of others. He must be a lover of good men, for all good men love one another, and he must be holy, for he is set apart to a holy office. So it's very important that we understand these characteristics when choosing men to be elders. And it's very important for men today, which they haven't been doing, striving to obtain these characteristics and to employ them as elders as they reach that opportunity. Now, we also want to look at the habits of an elder. An elder's got to have the habit of vigilance, not vengeance, but vigilance, or watchfulness. This is enjoined upon the elder because without it, many things most detrimental to the congregation would escape his notice. While the overseer should be far better informed as to the condition of the members of the church than any other person in it or outside of it. It is often the case, though, that the watchfulness goes by the wayside. Through watchfulness, he's the last sometimes to learn what's going on if he shuns this responsibility. So, we talked about the teacher and the preacher going out, or the preacher going out and visiting the members of the congregation. Here we're learning that this is the responsibility of the elders. If I don't show up to church, let's say I'm a member of the church that Michael here, who's putting up scriptures for us, preaches at. Now, Michael's also an elder, so he can lay aside his preaching and he can come to me as an elder and say, Jim, why haven't you come to church? Or why haven't you done this or that or the other? Because in the role of an elder, he would be doing what God expects him to do. You see, the elder has to be the overseer. He has to be on the lookout for everybody and everything else. These characteristics that we're talking about are very, very important. And these characteristics will determine whether an elder is actually qualified. So the elder also must not be given to much wine. And it's not merely drunkenness that is prohibited here. If it was, we would doubtless have the word which is appropriate for that expression of the idea. Neither is the idea of much in the original. The term is paranois, is what's meant by the wine here. And the means simply given to the wine. So it doubtless contemplates a man who is given to a freer use of wine than was customary among strictly sober people, even though he might never become intoxicated. Now we're going to stop here today with this last explanation, number 5, of the habits of an elder. But remember, we started this class looking back at the church universal, the church in a given area, the church as a local congregation. So the elder is not over any other churches. He's not over any other areas. He's simply the elder of that congregation. Keep in mind, it's not elder, but elders. It's plural. So that there has to be more than one. Never can a congregation have only one elder. It's just not scriptural. Now, next week, what we're going to do is start taking a look at what's called shepherding. What's involved in the work of an elder? What does he need to do? How does he need to do it? What are his responsibilities? And men take these responsibilities seriously. All the elders I know in the Lord's church are very serious about what they're doing. Now, don't get me wrong, you have bad elders. You have liberal elders in liberal churches who will let anything go, but a good, sound elder will follow the scriptures and will take his duties very seriously. So with that being said, I look forward to seeing you next week, and I hope and pray that you've learned something from this lesson. Until the next time that we meet, may God bless.